Caregiving can sometimes feel like an impossible struggle. Caregivers may be torn between taking care of loved ones and trying to maintain balance in life. The good news is that it doesn't have to be that way. The Caring Generation with host Pamela D Wilson is here to focus on the conversation of caring. You're not alone. In fact, you're in exactly the right place to share stories and learn tips and resources to help you and your loved ones. So now, please welcome the host of The Caring Generation, Pamela D Wilson.
This is Pamela D Wilson, caregiving expert, speaker, consultant, and guardian of the Caring Generation. The Caring Generation focuses on the conversation of caring, giving us permission to talk about aging, the challenges of caregiving, and everything in between. It's no surprise that needing care or becoming a caregiver changes everything. The Caring Generation is here to guide you along the journey, to let you know that you're not alone. You are in exactly the right place to share stories and learn about caregiving programs and resources to help you and your loved ones plan for what's ahead. Invite your aging parents, spouses, family, and friends to listen to the show. If you have a question or an idea for a future program, share your idea with me by responding to my social media posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also go to my website, PamelaDWilson.com, click on the Contact Me button in the top banner, and complete the caregiver survey. This week, I'm responding to the question of what to do when you hire an elderly parent's fire in-home caregivers. As always, there are two ways to look at this issue. The first is from the family caregiver's perspective. The person who puts time and effort into getting in-home care set up. The second is from the viewpoint of the elderly parent, who may only want family members to be the caregiver. After we talk about both sides of this concern, I'll share tips for how to work together and collaborate so that you can meet the needs of the caregiver and an elderly parent. So without discussing expectations right now, we're going to get there. Let's start with the frustrations experienced by the caregiver, who we will assume is exhausted and burned out. The caregiver wants and needs someone else, like an in-home caregiver, to step in and ease the time devoted to care activities. Plus, the caregiver may need time off to focus on their career, family, friendships, or social interests. There's nothing wrong with wanting to hire a paid caregiver to help out with elderly parents. I wish more caregivers could do this so that they can take better care of their health. Now, let's look at the other side. The caregiver spent time investigating care services to set up a caregiver for a parent. The caregiver shows up for work on day one and is promptly sent packing by your mom or dad. If you're the family caregiver and you hear about this, all you can think is, what the heck happened? I did all that work and poof, all my efforts went up in smoke. So let's take a step back. When you talk to your elderly parent about hiring a caregiver, how did they react? What did they say? Note, I'm making the assumption that you had this conversation. Was there an understanding, agreement, or disagreement about the activities the caregiver would perform, the work shifts, and adjusting to having someone other than you as the caregiver? Did your parent meet the caregiver before he or she showed up at the house the first time? Involving a parent in the decision-making process is vital to avoid you hiring and elderly parents firing caregivers. Also, working with a non-medical care agency who has an experienced manager who is empathetic to the situation and understands the hesitation that most elderly feel about having a caregiver in the home can also help smooth out worries about the situation. While most adult children chalk up parents firing in-home caregivers to a parent being stubborn, negative, or difficult, it's actually about much more that might not be so obvious. The first is the idea of dependence that can have a cultural basis. Westerners, usually called people living in the United States, focus on independence and pursuing personal goals. However, this isn't always consistently accurate because Westerners, or people living in the United States, happen to come from many cultural backgrounds. For example, the Asian culture focuses on positive family relationships well above personal goals. The Latino and African cultures also strongly value family and social relationships. So when you think about caregiving relationships and combine these with health and well-being, everybody has a different opinion about how to achieve these goals. Westerners or Americans tend to believe that health and well-being depend on personal control and mastery. In contrast, other cultures believe health and well-being depend on having harmonious relationships. Actually, in my opinion, a little bit of both can be the magic potion for success in family caregiving relationships and avoiding the you hire and elderly parents fire issue. So this aspect of elderly parents believing that family, not strangers, should be the caregiver can be one of the first hurdles in trying to get a parent to cooperate and agree about the need to hire outside caregivers. How do you get past this hurdle? One way is to make the need for hiring a caregiver more about you than what a loved one can't do. You have a busy job, a family, children. Maybe you're going to college. You need help in meeting an elderly parent's need for care and their belief or expectation that you will do everything. It's not possible. Making the need for hiring a caregiver about the caregiver and not the receiver leads to the second point for you hire and elderly parents fire caregivers, and coping with parents who won't accept strangers in their home. Being dependent on others is part of being a care receiver, and it's not always viewed as a positive behavior. Western cultures value independence above everything else. This means that your elderly parent doesn't like having to rely on others that are not family or have outsiders know their personal business. If children are caregivers, then they think, well, the need for care and all of my personal issues and my private information stays in the family. But if paid caregivers, strangers, are coming into the home, well then, everybody is going to know the family business. Parents may value their independence and their personal privacy so much that having a stranger come into the home to help with personal and relational tasks crushes their self-esteem. Accepting help from a non-family member can be viewed as a threat because the person who receives care kind of has to admit that they can't help themselves, or that maybe their children or other people view them as less than competent to manage their own daily needs and affairs. I want to share some research because there is a link between self-esteem, motivation, and avoidance type behaviors. I don't want to deal with that. And it's by Park and Maynor. I will place hyperlinks in the show transcript to the original articles if you're interested in reading them. They're actually pretty amazing. And the information might shed some additional light on aspects of why care relationships can be challenging. To find the transcript for this podcast, go to my website, PamelaDWilson.com, click on the Media tab, then the Caring Generation radio program, and search for episode 154. So, how does self-esteem link to relationships with others, and how does this relate to the relationship your parents might have with in-home caregivers? Park and Maynor state that people higher in self-esteem believe that others will be responsive to their needs. On the other hand, persons with low self-esteem, like a parent or a spouse with health problems who needs help, may worry more about protecting themselves from rejection. So in this case, instead of accepting the opportunity to get to know a hired caregiver, the most straightforward response from your parent is to reject the caregiver before the caregiver rejects them. So in a sense, your parent is participating in avoidance behaviors. They're purposely pushing away strangers who might be helpful because they're afraid of being judged or rejected. And so instead, parents withdraw from relationships and they focus on all the things that they struggle to do. In a sense, they beat themselves up mentally for needing the help of others, for being dependent, when this is part of life when you get older. Add to this the complication of an unhappy family caregiver who is stressed out from dealing with a parent who is driving much needed help out the door. While the caregiver may not have low self-esteem, your reaction to this inability and frustration to make a parent happy or to please a parent may result in criticism by telling a parent that they're difficult or hostile or mean. So what happens is the elderly parent isn't happy and neither is the caregiver. People who fear rejection and those who criticize are more likely to react negatively to other people. This is a challenge when you have primary responsibility for the care of an elderly parent who, because of self-esteem issues or feeling as if they're a burden, fight you every step of the way when you try to be helpful to improve their care situation. You hire, elderly parents fire, can feel like caregiving is a losing battle. So how do you deal with the real problem, which may not be that an elderly parent is stubborn or difficult, but that they suffer from low self-esteem? It's not as difficult as you might think, but it does take some time and what we call emotional labor. So what is that? Well, first of all, time is easy to understand, right? It takes time. Caregivers don't have extra time. Emotional labor means having that feeling that, it's all on me to keep things running smoothly. I have to do this. My parent's not helping. So how do you know if the concept of emotional labor is negatively affecting your caregiving relationship? Well, 1, you feel resentful and frustrated. 2, you feel taken advantage of as if you're not the one that does something, it's never going to get done. 3, you feel like the other person doesn't care as much or isn't putting forth equal effort. 4, you're emotionally exhausted. If you're a caregiver in this situation, what can you do? Look at the relationship and ask why you do so much. Does fear drive you to activity? Do you wonder, if I don't do this, will mom or dad be angry with me? Do you feel that you can't express your feelings because doing so will result in more arguments, more conflict with your mom, dad, spouse, grandparent, or the person you care for? If any of these issues apply, then there may be a communication gap, which can benefit from a little bit of attention. So let's take a step back and talk about how parent-child relationships when we are young translate to relationships when we're older. If you're the caregiver, it's likely more than not that you probably had a positive relationship with the parent you care for. Or you may be in a care relationship based on feelings of responsibility and duty. Of course, not all caregivers love the parent they care for. If this is your situation of caring for a parent you don't like, then all of this can be much more difficult. We are going to head out to a quick break and come back and continue with this topic. Know that caregiving doesn't have to be a do-it-yourself job. My website, PamelaDWilson.com, offers help, support, and education for caregivers and aging adults, online courses, articles, and more, plus this podcast. The Caring Generation answers questions caregivers ask. It's available worldwide on my website and your favorite podcast and music apps, including Apple, Spotify, Spreaker, and more. There's a link on my website where you can find all of the international apps. This is Pamela D Wilson, caregiving expert and advocate on the Caring Generation. Stay with me. I'll be right back. This is Pamela D Wilson, caregiver expert, advocate, and author on the Caring Generation. Check out my website, PamelaDWilson.com, where you'll find my online caregiver course, my book, The Caregiving Trap, my caregiver blog, this podcast, and many articles in my caregiver library. There's something for everyone on my website, PamelaDWilson.com. So back talking about parent-childhood relationships early in life, and how these translate to relationships with parents when we're older. Most families have one person, called the primary caregiver, who steps up and takes on the majority of responsibilities, even if other siblings exist. Now, if you're an only child, all of this falls on you. Your siblings may or may not want to be involved in the care of mom and dad. While this can be due to life's priorities like career, marriage, and raising children, I talk to many caregivers who express concern about siblings who want nothing to do with a parent. If this is your situation, consider that there may be something that you don't know about your brother or sister's relationship with your parent that has led to this breakdown. If this is the case, these siblings probably have not been in regular contact with your parents since they moved out of the house. Is this true? So you're asking them to be suddenly involved in the care of a parent probably isn't going to happen. So let's talk about low self-esteem and how this can affect the willingness of elderly parents to accept outside help when they don't have the motivation and they don't want to allow insiders into their lives for fear of being rejected or other fears. Let's say that hiring a paid caregiver was your idea. In most cases, it is the adult children or the spouse caregiver who seeks outside assistance. The person who needs care usually isn't in a position, physically or mentally, to investigate this unless it's following up on a plan they made when they were healthier, or in some cases, a nurse or a social worker at a doctor's office or a community health center may help older adults investigate and recommend services. Tip number 1 for self-esteem support and avoiding you hire, elderly parents fire caregiver issues is to involve the individuals most affected by the decision in hiring the caregiver. Obviously, this is you, the caregiver, but it may also be one or both of your parents if one needs care. And let's say that you're helping the healthy mom or dad take care of the sick mom or dad. Or suppose you're fortunate to have siblings involved in caring for parents. Ask if they want to be involved. Let's talk for a moment about hiring paid caregivers. You can employ independently, which means hiring an independent contractor. If you do that, you want to ensure that you investigate what this means with a tax accountant and that you have a well-written agreement to avoid unexpected issues, including a possible need to hire and fire. Or you can hire through a care agency that does a lot of this for you. Both ways work, but it's important to know what you're getting yourself into. So for a lot more detail on hiring and supervising in-home caregivers, there's a very detailed article on my website, PamelaDWilson.com. It's called 10 Tips to Manage In-Home Caregivers. So if you go to my website, you can type this in. There's a search bar at the top, I'll also place a link to the article in the show transcript. The article is helpful because there can be a lot of assumptions about hiring caregivers or using care agencies, which many times results in disappointment about the person sent to care for a loved one, or you may experience a revolving door of caregivers who never seem to stay. Hiring an agency or even an independent contractor, it's more work at the beginning because you have to take the lead in making sure you choose the right caregiver with the right background. And then you have to make sure the caregiver knows what they're supposed to do. While some wonderfully experienced caregivers may show up and take the initiative to do what they see is needed, others do have to be told what to do, and then they grow in experience over time. All of this relates to one of the reasons you hire and elderly parents fire caregivers. The caregiver shows up and doesn't know what to do. Your parent doesn't feel like they should have to tell the caregiver what to do or supervise them, so instead they send the caregiver home. Another reason to involve your elderly parent or a spouse most affected by having a caregiver come into the home is so that you can be crystal clear about the need and what the caregiver will do. Now, as you know, your parent or your spouse is going to say, "Oh, I don't need any help. I can take care of myself. I'm just fine." Let's be honest, having a helper is a blow to the ego. It's a blow to self-esteem, no matter how old you are. Think of this, to be reminded daily through the presence of this person, this stranger, that you can't do the things that you used to do can be frustrating. The idea of accepting why help is needed is a hurdle to cross when you're trying to convince elderly parents to agree to have a caregiver other than you come into the home. Another obvious issue is money. Who's paying for the caregiver? Your parents or you? Or is the caregiver through a Medicaid agency? Parents may value their independence so much and their money so much that they're saying, "I'm not going to pay for an outside caregiver." Convincing a parent that they have to spend their hard-earned money and saved money on paid help, that can be tricky, but it can be done. I know many children who take money out of their own bank accounts to pay for caregivers. While I understand doing this, if your parents have the financial resources to pay for care, in my opinion, they should pay for their own care, not their children. They earn the money, it should be spent on their care. So these are the conversations that you want to have. The caregiver is for you, not your parents. You need a break and time away from caring for your parents. It's not that you don't love them, you do. You've been showing up for how long? Months, years? But in all honesty, you're burned out. Your children might be struggling with school because you're never around. Your marriage may be on the rocks because all your free time is consumed caring for mom and dad. All these examples are not to make your parents feel guilty, even though they probably will, but this is just the reality of life. There's only so much time in the day. There's only so many people that you can give your attention to. And life has to balance out at some point. Plus, if your parents want to stay in their home, eventually there's got to be some compromise. The same goes for parents living in an assisted living community who may need more care than the community can provide. They don't want to move to a nursing home, so hiring paid caregivers to visit your parents at their assisted living community may be a bridge to avoid moving to a nursing home. Then we have adult children who need a break, spousal caregivers who are doing this 24/7. There's no time off. You may have to be really firm about the need to hire a caregiver if your parent or spouse disagrees. You know, burnout is so tough, and you may feel like, "Oh, this is not worth the battle." It is worth the battle because your health, you are worth the battle. You need time off. As much as you may not want to admit it, being a caregiver negatively affects your health. You're too busy to eat healthy, exercise, maintain regular doctor appointments, and when you neglect these areas in your life, what do you think happens over time? You get sick. I have caregivers who say to me, "Pamela, I've never been sick before." My response is usually, "Well, perhaps this is a sign or a warning that it's time to take better care of you before you can't take care of a parent or spouse who relies 100% on you? What if you don't wake up tomorrow? What's your backup plan? Are legal documents in place for power of attorney? Have you created an emergency medical plan for elderly parents? These are true critical actions every caregiver should take. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. You can find article links in this show transcript about how to make a backup plan and an emergency care plan for elderly parents. So if you want to hire a caregiver for a loved one, put yourself in their place. How would you feel if your children told you what to do or made you feel like you couldn't care for yourself? We value independence, and it's tough on the ego when we have to rely on someone else. And unless you feel the way a parent does related to whatever health problems they have and how it affects their life, honestly, you are never going to know what they're going through. If you've always been healthy, it's hard to imagine what it's like to be sick. Expressing care and concern for the situation of a loved one is an ongoing and vital step to let them know that you understand, even if you really don't understand. Just be honest. The situation isn't ideal for you, and it's not for them. For this reason, that paid caregiver can relieve a lot of stress about ensuring daily needs are met. Combine care and concern with listening. I know caregivers want to be heard, whether you're sharing in an online support group or in-person support group or in a counseling session. You want somebody to listen to you and not say a word. Well, so do your elderly parents. And I know listening can be time-consuming. Consider calling your parents while you're cleaning your kitchen or doing the laundry or other tasks that don't require much mental attention. Many caregivers have parents who call them at work. This is where you really must set a boundary so you don't lose your job or have these phone calls negatively affect your work performance. Tell your parents you can call them on a lunch break if it's an emergency. Otherwise, schedule a call with them in the evening. And remind them that if they allowed a caregiver into their home, they would have a person there readily available who could help with all these issues about why they feel they need to call you every day at work, sometimes 5 to 10 times. So by listening, you might actually gain some information that helps support the reason that a caregiver is needed. Paid caregivers can become great companions and listeners. And sometimes the person you care for is lonely because they spend so much time alone. So let's say that you've talked. Your parent or spouse understands and agrees that a caregiver is a good idea. How do you avoid the risk of you hire and elderly parents fire the caregiver? Whether you're working with an agency or hiring independently, do your best to meet and interview several caregivers. Don't just allow the agency to send someone sight unseen. You can always talk to them on the phone if for some reason you can't meet them, but you really do want to interview them. Or if they are saying, there's no time for an interview, we can't introduce them, then make sure that you give them a list of the necessary qualifications and skills that you want this caregiver to do. Deal killers for elderly parents are caregivers who are supposed to, for example, be able to cook, yet your parents get peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Or a caregiver who's supposed to be able to help mom or dad bathe, but they admit, well, I've never done this before. The bottom line is that you want an experienced caregiver who's been with the agency for at least 6 months or has documented years of experience. Because I know of agencies who hire caregivers one day and send them to a client's home the next day, untrained, because they want the work and the caregiver has no experience. That is a train wreck waiting to happen for an elderly parent who is hesitant to hire a caregiver. And honestly, the agencies should know better. So you've got to ask the hard questions of the agency staff. So a reminder, go back and read the article I mentioned that's on my website, 10 Tips to Manage In-Home Caregivers. It'll save you a lot of time and rework and frustration on the part of your parents. So let's keep going. You have chosen a caregiver. You've met them, you've talked to them, you've interviewed them, who you believe has the right skills and the temperament and they spend the first day with your parent. What do? You call mom or dad and ask them how it went. And then you listen. Listen to the good and the bad. If there are concerns, get on the phone with the agency right away, talk to the supervisor, and ask that the supervisor relay information to the caregiver before they return for their next shift. If this caregiver truly was not a good match for any reason, ask for another caregiver. To make this work, your parent needs to know that you're going to be involved in every step to get this off the ground. And be persistent in communicating with the agency, because if you don't, they will think that everything is okay when it's not. In some cases, if your parent needs a lot of care, like hours and days, and one agency can't staff the entire project because of not having trained caregivers or enough staff, it's a good idea to hire 2 agencies to work together to fill those time slots. Again, while it may seem like more work, and initially, honestly, it is, the benefit is that you have a backup. The other agency can provide a caregiver if one of their caregivers calls out sick. You want to be upfront and let the 2 agencies know that you expect them to work together. You actually may be surprised that this will be a relief to them, especially if they're having difficulties hiring, training, and retaining caregivers. And last but not least, be encouraging to your parent. Be positive that this is going to work out. It's going to be for the best. There may have to be a little trial and error. Maybe it's going to take a few weeks. Because until you age and begin having the health problems of your parents again, it's impossible to know what's going through their mind. Years later, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, when this is your daily experience, you'll be much more empathetic and you'll realize what your parents were feeling. But until then, remember, involve parents or the person you care for in the decision-making process as much as possible. If they have dementia, you probably will have to make the decisions on your own, assuming that you're the legally responsible person. Express care and concern about the struggles that result from the caregiving relationships from both sides, you and your parent. Listen and be encouraging, and remember to say thank you and ask your parent to do the same. Mom or dad, thank you for accepting a caregiver. Then your parent says, son or daughter or wife, thank you for getting a caregiver for me. I know you're stressed. The best care relationships are reciprocal 50-50 relationships with both parties contributing as much as they can. Know that it is possible to work through these you hire and elderly parents fire caregiver situations. Honest conversations and improving communication skills and trust will help you get through this. Now, if you're looking for more help and support in the care of loved ones, check out my online complimentary webinar program. I'll place a link here in the transcript. You can find the course by going to my website, PamelaDWilson.com, clicking on Support and More, and then the link that says Support Caring for Elderly Parents. I thank you all for continuing to pose questions for this podcast and all the videos I share on my YouTube channel. This is Pamela D Wilson, family caregiving expert on the caring generation. Again, visit my website, PamelaDWilson.com, where you will find my caregiver library, Caring for Aging Parents blog, my book, The Caregiving Trap, and an extensive step-by-step online program to take you through the A to Z of caring for elderly parents or yourself. I look forward to being with you all again soon. God bless you all. Sending love to everyone. Sleep well tonight. Have a fabulous day tomorrow. And enjoy each day until we are here together again.
Tune in each week for The Caring Generation with host Pamela D. Wilson. Come join the conversation and see how Pamela can provide solutions and peace of mind for everyone. Here on Pamela D. Wilson's The Caring Generation.